All right, so this is what we're doing this week. We're doing Revelation. Everybody loves Revelation, right? Pretty sure it's everybody's favorite. And actually, what I have here is information you guys might not know or be aware of. 96.48% of Christians are too intimidated to read Revelation. It's an absolutely true statistic. I did not make it up. I made it up. I'm sorry. I'm lying. But a lot of people are very scared of Revelation. And I think that's a shame. I actually really love Revelation. You might be wondering why I would choose to talk about Revelation or why I would feel qualified to talk about Revelation. Well, I teach at my church. I do the young adults group. Our name is Compass, and we just finished reading through the entire New Testament. We did it only on Monday nights, so I didn't assign any reading. So we read it out loud on Monday nights. We only meet for about 2 hours, so it took us about 3 years to get through the entire New Testament, but we did it. We did it, and we just finished recently. And we probably spent 2.5 months, maybe even 3, on Revelation because it's so much. It's so much. And so I obviously had to teach through Revelation. And I've read it multiple times. And I would say that my understanding of Revelation and its purpose and what it's trying to tell us has definitely evolved. There's a great book that I'll recommend even before I start that's called The Theology of Revelation. It's by a scholar named Richard Bauckham, which is Bauckham, if you're into reading about that kind of stuff. I read that at the beginning of COVID last year because that's what I do in my free time. And it was actually a really great book. It kind of jumps you into kind of a new framework for how to understand Revelation intelligently. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to do very broad strokes, and I'm not trying to tell you guys, even really the central message of Revelation or any of the intricacies that are in there, as much as I'm trying to give you guys some skills that you can use when you jump into Revelation to actually understand it more intelligently. So that's the goal for tonight. Why do I think that Revelation is important? Well, it's actually in Revelation itself, and it begins the book. We're going to be reading a lot of scripture tonight, so hopefully you guys like the Bible. But I did this to you last time or the time before, so I think you're okay. All right, so all these quotes, also, they're from the New English Translation, my personal favorite Bible translation. It's in the YouVersion app, has plenty of footnotes, which are actually super great and helpful. So if you guys use the YouVersion Bible app, I would highly recommend reading that version if you get a chance. Okay, so Revelation 1:1-3 says, "The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must happen very soon. He made it clear to his servant John, who then testified to the testimony about who then testified to everything that he saw concerning the word of God and the testimony about Jesus Christ. Blessed is the one who reads the words of this prophecy aloud, and blessed are those who hear and obey the things written in it, because the time is near." Okay, so we have 2 things right off the bat. This revelation, John saw it. Okay, traditionally this would be John the Apostle, one of the 12 disciples. It's not definitively him, but it's very likely. Okay, so right now our working knowledge, we're going to say it's John the Apostle. John received this vision. It is a vision of Jesus Christ, which either means that Jesus Christ gave it to him or that it's about him. If you actually read Revelation, Jesus only gives parts of the revelation. Okay, so parts of it are given by angels, parts of it are given by Jesus. So the revelation is about Jesus, and it's given to John. So already the fact that this vision that John is seeing is about Jesus should interest us because we love Jesus and want to know about him. That's our goal. That's your guys' goal. I saw it. You had the little slogan there. Okay, so this is about Jesus, so it's important. But then this last sentence here, blessed is the one who reads the words of this prophecy aloud. I did that in Bible study, all of it. I'm blessed. We're good. We're doing good. But more importantly than the first part of that sentence, I actually think is, and more interesting, is the second part, which is, blessed are those who hear and obey the things written in it. I don't know how many of you guys think of Revelation as having things in it for you to obey, but I certainly, that if you were to ask me what Revelation is about, that would be about the last thing I told you it was, okay? But it's very clear, it's the very opening of the book. It says, those who hear and obey the things written in it. That means that this book is trying to teach us something about Jesus, okay? So this book is not just an appendix to the rest of the Bible. It's not just a prophecy of the future. It's trying to tell us something that's important for us to know. And whatever it's trying to teach us is supposed to affect the way we live, okay? So if you guys only come away with one thing tonight, what I want you to go away with is Revelation is important. And it would be awesome if all of you actually were to sit down with it and spend the time to understand what it's trying to tell you about Jesus. So, this is pretty nice and easy here, Revelation 1:1-3. I think everybody likes that. But then, there's stuff like this in Revelation, which comes from chapter 9. We'll read this passage here. It says, then the fifth angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth, and he was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. He opened the shaft of the abyss, and smoke rose out of it like smoke from a giant furnace. The sun and the air were darkened with smoke from the shaft. Then out of the smoke came locusts onto the earth, and they were given power like that of the scorpions of the earth. They were told not to damage the grass of the earth or any green plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their forehead. The locusts were not given permission to kill them, but only to torture them for 5 months. And their torture was like that of a scorpion when it stings a person. In those days, people will seek death, but will not be able to find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. Now the locusts looked like horses equipped for battle. On their heads were something like crowns, similar to gold, and their faces looked like men's faces. They had hair like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like iron breastplates, and the sound of their wings was like the noise of many horse-drawn chariots charging into battle. They have tails and stingers like scorpions, and their ability to injure people for 5 months is in their tails. They have as king over them the angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek, Apollyon. The first woe has passed, but 2 woes are still coming after these things. So that's fun. Some good stuff to obey in there, I think, right? I'm going to say no. That's a very cryptic passage. I think most people would agree. And if you try to draw it, which I actually had my fiance do, sorry, I accidentally clicked. I'm trying to get the chat box away, and the mouse disappears when you're presenting. And I opened up the chat, and now I can't get rid of it, which is very unfortunate. Okay, here we go. So yeah, we had my fiance draw this on the whiteboard when we were going through it, and it's a really freaky looking creature. But then the question becomes, do we actually expect to see a creature like that in the future at some point, right? And so there are passages like this where it starts to become less and less clear, I guess, what Revelation is actually trying to tell us. And I think that the passages like this are why most people just try to avoid it altogether and push it to the side and say, I know the rest of the Bible, okay, this one I can just ignore. So we're actually not going to go into Revelation 9 that much. This is just kind of a teaser. I think that this passage is super interesting, and we had probably an hour-long discussion on it in my Bible study. And it was really fun and really interesting. And hopefully with the things we're going to go over next, you will feel better prepared to jump into this and understand it better. Okay, so these are the 3 strategies we're going to go over for helping you guys with Revelation. The first is to recognize biblical hyperlinks. The second is to understand genre. And the third is to watch for repetition. Okay, that is our framework for the night, and that's where we're going to jump into. So, biblical hyperlinks, and I get this term from the Bible Project, which I also highly recommend. Tim Mackey says it all the time mentioning hyperlinks. And so the idea here is that the Bible all throughout is referencing itself. Okay, it's referencing other books, it's referencing other stories, it's referencing designs of stories, and all of those things, the more that you read the Bible, the more that they pop out to you. For instance, the Bible Project has a whole podcast series on trees. It's a really interesting podcast series, but after you listen to it, or after I listened to it, and now I'm reading through the Bible again this year, it's like the trees kind of just pop off the page, but you see them everywhere, and they all kind of are in these strategic spots that give you a similar, they're put there for a purpose. Most narratives don't spend time to describe trees, okay? They're there for a reason. And so while John historically, factually, he received these visions from, over a period of time. It's not like he saw all this and wrote it down as he was seeing it, right? He received these visions, but he has put them together and written them out for us using a bunch of information from the rest of the Bible to give it more depth to us, okay? So he's not just writing a literal, description of what he saw. He's also interpreting it for us by linking it back to other things in the Bible previously. So for an example, we're going to go into Revelation 11, which is one of my favorite stories in Revelation, I think. This is of the two witnesses, and it's the very beginning of the story, but we're only reading the first half of the story. Okay. Then a measuring rod like a staff was given to me, and I was told, "Get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and the ones who worship there. But do not measure the outer courtyard of the temple. Leave it out, because it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will trample on the holy city for 42 months. And I will grant my two witnesses authority to prophesy for 1,260 days, dressed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone wants to harm them, fire comes out of their mouths and completely consumes their enemies. If anyone wants to harm them, they must be killed this way. These two have the power to close up the sky so that it does not rain during the time they are prophesying. They have power to turn the waters to blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague whenever they want. When they have completed their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will make war on them and conquer them and kill them. Their corpses will lie in the street of the great city that is symbolically called Sodom and Egypt, where their Lord was also crucified." Okay, this passage is dense. There's a lot going on here. So I'm going to give you a brief overview, just point by point. We're not going to jump into them, but I'm going to just kind of show you guys all the allusions that are right here, okay? Temple imagery. If you want to understand why they're talking about measuring the temple and why there's a section for the Gentiles and why there's a section for the other people, you have to go back and read the description of the temple and what the temple was used for. You have to go all the way back to, the Torah, the original 5 books of the Bible. 42 months. 42 months is, 3.5 years. 3.5 years is a very significant number. It is half of 7, which is perhaps a more significant number. 3.5 years is used throughout Daniel and throughout Revelation in very important ways, and it keeps popping up, okay? This parenthetical part is actually what we're going to jump into. I'm just giving you guys an overview of the rest of it. If anyone wants to harm them, fire comes out of their mouth. That is probably alluding to stories in the Old Testament, for instance, of fire coming out of the mouth. I can think of a few that have to do with fire coming out of the mouth. We did not jump into that sentence that closely. But it's there if you want to find it. Closing up the sky, that would be Elijah. Elijah closes up the sky, I think, for the drought, right? And then he did the thing with Baal and the prophets of Baal. You have the water turning to blood and the plagues. That's an allusion to Egypt. And then you have Sodom and Egypt referenced here as the place where Jesus was crucified. Well, Jesus was crucified in Rome. And John is saying that Rome is symbolically called Sodom and Egypt. So now if you want to know what John thinks of Rome, you just go look at what the Old Testament authors thought of Sodom and Egypt, and you know. Okay? That was a lot of information I just threw it at you, but we're going to jump into a different one, which is probably the most obscure one in this passage. And I'd say that most of the times if you're reading this stuff and you find something obscure, it's probably a reference to somewhere else in the Bible. So what we're going to jump into right here is this peculiar little parenthetical remark that John gives us. Presumably, this is not part of what John was told by the angel. Presumably. It could have been. But it's explaining the two witnesses, and it calls them olive trees and lampstands, which is not very helpful to me as a Western American person living in the 21st century. I don't even know what an olive tree looks like, and I don't use a lampstand because I have lights in my ceiling. So if we want to actually know why the witnesses are being called olive trees and lampstands, we're going to have to do a little bit of digging, I think. Luckily, I've done it for you, and it's on the next slide. So we jump back into Zechariah 4 here, one of the minor prophets. And in Zechariah 4, it says, "Next I asked the messenger, what are these two olive trees on the right and the left of the menorah? Before he could reply, I asked again, what are these two extensions of the olive trees, which are emptying out the golden oil through the two golden pipes? He replied, don't you know what these are? And I said, no, sir. And Josh said, no, sir. So he said, these are the two anointed ones who stand by the Lord of the whole earth. Okay, so in this passage, Zechariah is seeing an image. He's seeing a vision, right? Zechariah is a prophet. He's seeing a vision. And in his vision, he actually sees olive trees. He sees them next to the menorah, which holds candles, a lampstand. Wow, look at that. Okay, so these two olive trees that are on the left and the right of the menorah, the angel interprets the symbol for Zechariah, and he says they are the two anointed ones. Well, in order to know who the two anointed ones are, we need a history lesson, but we're not going to do that, and I'm just going to tell you who they are. But this is happening when the Jews return from exile from Babylon, okay? And they're trying to rebuild Jerusalem. And so these two anointed people, the first of them is Joshua, and a good name, by the way. He is the high priest. He's the high priest who is coming back to Jerusalem. And the other guy is named Zerubbabel, which is also a great name. And he is a descendant of King David, okay? So you have a priest on one side of the menorah, and you have a king, a royal person, on the right side of the menorah. Well, I just gave them sides in my picture. I don't know who was on which side. This combination of priest and king is really important in the Old Testament if you trace it through. And it's important because priest and king together is exactly what the Messiah is prophesied to be. Okay? The Messiah is a priest and also a king. If you want to find more information about that, you can go to Isaiah and look at the servant passages in particular. They really kind of hone in on this. Okay, so now we know who the olive trees are. It's Joshua and Zerubbabel, a high priest, and a king. But if we go back here, we still don't have all the information because we know they're olive trees but we do not know why they're called lampstands. Except you would have known if you had read the beginning of Revelation, which we skipped because we don't have time. So if we jump back to the beginning of Revelation, we get to find out what the lampstands are. The mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and the 7 golden lampstands is this. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. Okay, so now we know what lampstands represent. We know what olive trees represent. Now we can put that information together and we can gather more information about these 2 witnesses and why they are in this story at all. These 2 witnesses, they are representing the church. Their mission is to mediate between God and the nations, which is the role of the priest, and to faithfully rule creation, which is the role of a king. Okay, so this one sentence that uses symbols is actually telling you a lot about the 2 witnesses. And the significance of the number 2, if you guys remember from the Deuteronomy law, is that truth was established by 2 or more witnesses. 2 is the minimum number of people you need in order to convict somebody in a court. Okay, so these 2 witnesses, they're witnessing to the truth of Christ. You need at least 2 of them for anybody to be held accountable. That in this symbolic world, you need two people to basically tell everybody else. That's sufficient. So we really rolled through that. I know I'm going fast, but Caitlin said I had to be short. I could easily go on for hours and hours, and I'm sure you'd all love to hear me talk for that long, but I was not given the liberty. So you don't have to take my word for this, honestly. This is an interpretive move, okay? But I am showing you where these images, at least, I'll call them symbols, where these symbols originate from within the thought world that John is working in, okay? So based on that, this is my interpretation of the 2 witnesses. You don't have to agree. But Revelation, I mean, there's very few sections of Revelation where you're not going to find things like this that rely on you actually knowing basically everything in the Old Testament and a good portion of what is in the New Testament as well. Okay, I find that really cool. I know you guys are going back to school. I'm giving you 3 homework assignments tonight if you actually want to practice this stuff, but you are not obligated to do it because who knows when I'll be back and I will probably forget that I gave them to you. But the first homework assignment, which is for this first, interpretive practice thing, compare Revelation 9:1-12. That's the locust passage that we already read. Read that passage and then go read the first 2 chapters of Joel. Okay? Once you read the first 2 chapters of Joel, you should get a much better understanding of Revelation 9. You might not get it completely, but you'll see what I mean if you just jump into the first 2 chapters of Joel. That's only if you find this stuff interesting. If you don't, I'm sorry, because I'm probably boring you at this point. But we're going to move to our next move, which is understanding genre. Most of Revelation is apocalyptic literature. Apocalypse does not mean the end of the world. Although I should say that differently. In English, apocalypse, in modern English, that is what apocalypse means. But the word that apocalypse is sourced from, that is actually used in the Bible, that is not what it means, okay? It comes from the Greek, that word, apocalypsis. I'm going to say that I said that right. It was at least close. And its definition is an uncovering or a laying bare / making naked. Okay, so it is more close to the English word revelation than to the modern English word apocalypse. Okay, so this is Jewish literature that is meant to unveil something. What is the purpose of these texts? They are supposed to reveal to us unseen spiritual realities. But because they're visions, they're not trying to necessarily give you a literal, perfect representation of those realities. They're supposed to get you in a thought world to explore those. And they're supposed to, in some sense, I guess, convince you that those spiritual realities are real. To look at this, we're actually not going to use Revelation. We're going to use Isaiah. And I wanted to use Isaiah for a good reason. Isaiah, this particular prophecy, we should be able to easily see in history where this prophecy was fulfilled. Okay, it's talking about the destruction of Babylon. Babylon was destroyed, and we know when it was destroyed and how it was destroyed. But what I want to read to you is Isaiah talking about the destruction of Babylon. Okay, this is various portions of Isaiah 13. And I didn't cherry pick, I just shortened. So verse 1, this is a message about Babylon that God revealed to Isaiah, son of Amoz. Look, the Lord's day of judgment is coming. It is a day of cruelty and savage, raging anger, destroying the earth and annihilating its sinners. Indeed, the stars in the sky and their constellations no longer give out their light. The sun is darkened as soon as it rises, and the moon does not shine. I will punish the world for its evil and wicked people for their sin. I will put an end to the pride of the insolent. I will bring down the arrogance of tyrants. I will make human beings more scarce than pure gold, and people more scarce than gold from Ophir. So I will shake the heavens, and the earth will shake loose from its foundation, because of the fury of the Lord who commands armies in the day he vents his raging anger. Look, I am stirring up the Medes to attack them. They are not concerned about silver, nor are they interested in gold. Their arrows will cut young men to ribbons. They have no compassion on a person's offspring. They will not look with pity on children. Babylon, the most admired of kingdoms, the Chaldean source of honor and pride, will be destroyed by God, just as Sodom and Gomorrah were. Don't you love judgment passages in the Bible? I know that's also everybody's favorite thing to read. But this is, I think this is informative for us to actually understand the genre. This is received by Isaiah from God, and it's talking about the destruction of literal Babylon. Babylon is a symbolic place in the Bible also, but if you look in verse 17, this is specifically talking about the destruction of Babylon by the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay, so this is a historical event that we know about. But notice the language that is used to describe this day when God destroys Babylon. Okay, the earth is going to be destroyed. The stars and the constellations will no longer give light. The sun will be darkened. The moon will not shine. Human beings are going to be more scarce than gold. The heavens are going to shake. The earth will also shake, and it will fall from its foundation. Okay? This is talking about a local event, namely the destruction of Babylon, and an empire that had a reach that was basically the known world for, the writer here, Isaiah. This would have been, basically Babylon was the world power and covered everything that Isaiah would have been able to get to in his life easily. So there's worldwide destructive language or cosmic destructive language here, but it is not talking about the destruction of the world. It's talking about the destruction of an empire or a people group or an oppressive regime, okay? So this is informative to us because Revelation is full of this kind of imagery, and it's written in the same genre, okay? So when we read Revelation, we have to be careful. We have to say, is the earth going to be, pelted with fireballs from outer space? Or is this just a way to talk about something else? Okay. Obviously, in this passage, Babylon was destroyed. but the things that accompany it in the symbolic world are not literally what happened, okay? And that doesn't mean the prophecy is false. It is the genre in which this prophecy was written. So I want to draw your guys' attention to that because it's all over Revelation. You all know the stuff I'm talking about. And we just need to make sure that we're intelligent about what we call a literal prophecy and what we take a more restrained view and say, well, maybe this is trying to get me to understand something else, okay? This one is probably the hardest to do, probably. Here is the homework for this genre. I gathered a few other passages that you guys can go to look at. Joel 2-3, Amos 8, and Isaiah 24. And what you want to do with these passages is you want to see if you can easily determine their scope. Meaning, are they talking about the whole world? Or are they just talking about a single event in history, but still using language that seems to suggest the world is ending? Okay, I think this is a good exercise. And really, you can read most of any of the prophetic books and still do this exercise fairly well. Just some of them you might have to guess at the answer and not know for sure. I think the ones that I put here, you could easily tell if you looked at history, but I could be wrong. Maybe I wasn't that nice to you guys. Okay, third tool we have is watching for repetition. Okay, here is a trivia question. How many times does the world end in Revelation? Does anybody know?
Can we do a range?
Sure, give me a range.
Greater than or equal to 0, less than or equal to 80.
Wow, you sound like a weatherman. Okay. Well, you're right.
Epic.
Okay. Let's read some passages from Revelation, okay, and see how many we come across. Obviously chosen because they are talking about the end of the world. This is Revelation 6:12-17. Then I looked when the Lamb opened the 6th seal, and a huge earthquake took place. The sun became as black as sackcloth made of hair, and the full moon became blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to the earth like a fig tree, dropping its unripe figs when shaken by a fierce wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved from its place. Then the kings of the earth, the very important people, the generals, the rich, the powerful, and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They said to the mountains and to the rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of the one who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, because the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to withstand it?" All right, that's time number 1. I would say that if my sky is being rolled up like a scroll, then I can no longer live on the planet Earth. But that's just my personal feeling. Okay, number 2. This is Revelation 16:17-21. Finally, the 7th angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne, saying, "It is done." Then there were flashes of lightning, roaring, and crashes of thunder, and there was a tremendous earthquake. An earthquake unequaled since humanity has been on the earth, so tremendous was that earthquake. The great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations collapsed. So Babylon the Great was remembered before God and was given the cup filled with the wine made of God's furious wrath. Every island fled away, and no mountains could be found, and gigantic hailstones, weighing about 100 pounds each, fell from heaven on people, but they blasphemed God because of the plague of hail, since it was so horrendous. Again, worldwide destruction. You have basically all the land masses just disappearing, running away like they have feet. I love that image. Islands running away. And the mountains just hide. It's like they dip back down under the ocean. Okay? I think that this is another end of the world. Number 3, Revelation 20:11. Then I saw a large white throne and the one who was seated on it. The earth and the heaven fled from his presence, and no place was found for them. Again, now the earth is running away. We went from the sky running away to the land running away to the entire earth just saying, nope, not today. I'm done with you guys. Okay, those are all the places when I looked through Revelation that I see the world ending. You could make arguments for more, probably make arguments for less, but for our purposes, I got to do the choosing. So there's 3, definitively. Okay. But now, because we know that there's 3, you have to answer a question, an important question that will very much determine how you read the book of Revelation, okay? Is this a progressive destruction of the earth, or are they all talking about the actual end of the earth? This is important. We read them chronologically, so you can kind of see, the sky runs away, the land runs away, the earth runs away. You could make the argument that this is progressive. But you could also make the argument that they all seem to prevent humans from living on the earth any longer. Okay, so this is kind of a dividing line, is what I've seen. If you look at interpretations, is how are you going to deal with things like this in Revelation, which this is not the only one. How do you interpret the repetition in Revelation? And you really have the 2 options that we just gave. So here's the first thing. If you go with progressive destruction, okay? Most people who would say progressive destruction are doing so because they believe that scripture needs to be interpreted literally. But the definition of literally there is much stronger than someone who will take the other side, okay? In other words, if Revelation says that the sky is going to fold up like a scroll, then at some point in the future, the sky is going to fold up like a scroll, okay? But even more so, if you take an even stronger view of literal scripture and you say, well, Revelation is going to happen in the order Revelation is written in, you're going to have some problems later on in the book specifically. I'm not saying that there haven't been very smart people who believe that and who have come up with solutions, but it's hard, especially at the very end of Revelation. This isn't a homework assignment, but it's interesting research. There are 2 battles at the very end of Revelation. And it is, if you read them chronologically, it doesn't make much sense. But there are plenty of smart people who believe that they're 2 different battles and who come up with ways around the difficulties that poses. Okay? Your other option is to say that they're all the same, to say that Revelation is non-chronological. It's basically a collection. This also has a pitfall, and it should be obvious what that pitfall is, because if you decide that it's non-chronological, you could end up kind of just picking and choosing what you want to be literal and what you don't want to be literal. So you have to be really smart about it. And the problem is that there's very few safeguards that you can trust in to prevent you from going too far with this kind of interpretation. Other than doing reading of, people who don't agree with you and who are probably smarter than all of us combined, because there's a lot of really smart people who look at Revelation. Okay, so these are kind of the 2 camps, and obviously you can fall somewhere in the middle here. But it's a really important question, and one that will inform the way that you end up interpreting Revelation when you get there. My own personal opinion, after looking at this stuff and spending a lot of time in it, comparatively to most people, not enough to, write a doctorate paper on it or anything. I think that these 3 events are all the same. They happen in very different parts of the book, right? So if I say that all the events are the same, I have to now come up with a way to interpret that intelligently. And so when I was going through it with the group, I ended up making a giant spreadsheet, and I basically read through Revelation and sorted out the different events, and I saw when they repeated. And from that, I was able to figure out how I thought that Revelation was talking about everything that was going on. I have that spreadsheet. It's available. I don't mind sending it to you guys if you really want to see it. It wouldn't have looked good on a slide, and it's quite large. It would have been really small because there's a lot of events and a lot of repetition, and it's probably not complete, and I might have gotten some things wrong. But I think that was a good exercise for me specifically, because looking at how everything fits together in the spreadsheet made me, my personal idea is that each of the little pieces of Revelation is kind of giving you a glimpse of a different part of the same thing, like looking at a crystal from a different side, right? They're all talking about the ultimate culmination of creation in the new creation, but they're all doing it from a slightly different angle with different sets of imagery from the Old Testament. That is my interpretation. You do not have to agree with me. You do not. I have a slide on that in a second, but first your homework. Okay. This is basically make a spreadsheet. You don't have to do it, but here's some examples of other things that are repeated. How the unrighteous people respond to God's judgment, the persecution of the righteous, and also the judgment of all people. Those three things are repeated multiple times in Revelation and lead you to similar interpretive difficulties, whichever route you take. What you should keep in mind here is that this Revelation is important, but you cannot use your interpretation as a baseline to judge another Christian's, the validity of another Christian's beliefs, right? The Revelation, there have been so many smart people and legitimate Christ followers who've had vastly different interpretations of Revelation, and that's okay, because the core ideas of Revelation are still intact in almost, well, I guess in every traditional interpretation of Revelation, right? Christ is going to come back at some point, and there is going to be a separation of the righteous from the unrighteous. Core ideas in Revelation, they percolate all throughout. There's very little that's more disappointing to me in the church than people putting up walls between other believers based on things like this. They're just not that crucial. But I also strongly believe that you, as your own person and as a professing Christ follower, you should read Revelation, and you should have an idea of how you think that it should be read. You should be able to have a conversation with somebody who has a different viewpoint than you, and you should be able to explain it to them. But whether or not you're right or wrong, your salvation does not hinge on that. So it's not high stakes, but again, the book at the very beginning says that this book has things that are going to affect the way that we live and the way that we follow Christ and the way that we know Christ. So I, again, strongly encourage you guys to actually spend some time in this book and look through it and see what you think. Here's a review of the strategies that we went over. Hyperlinks, genre, repetition. Really broad strokes that we painted there. But I think that those three are going to really help you read Revelation.
Closing announcements. We have our recap of events coming up this week. Small groups tomorrow at 8 p.m. Game night, 8 p.m. Discord, that's on Friday. 1820, the prayer night, is at 6:20 p.m. on Zoom. And our final GBM for the summer is next week on Wednesday at 9 p.m. And that is also a surprise. And there are no hints to what it could possibly be about this time. Definitely nothing on screen for sure that could, give away anything about next week. So looking forward to seeing you all then. Thanks again, Josh, and have a great rest of your week, guys.